On the fog-shrouded evening of November 3rd, 1870, the ferry El Capitan prepared to make its routine crossing of San Francisco Bay. Among the passengers boarding that fateful day, Alexander Crittenden, a respected 49-year-old attorney, and a mysterious woman cloaked entirely in black, her face concealed behind a drawn veil. Her identity was Laura Ann Hunt Fair, former boarding house proprietor, now a portrait of eerie tranquility. Within 60 minutes, their 7-year clandestine affair would end in blood. Born in Mississippi during June 1837, Laura Ann Hunt experienced marriage and widowhood before reaching 17. 2 additional marriages crumbled in succession. By her early 30s, she'd ventured westward, operating a boarding establishment alongside her mother in San Francisco's bustling streets. Acquaintances described her measured speech and meticulous demeanor, a woman who orchestrated her life with precision, leaving minimal chaos in her wake. Their paths crossed in 1863, when Crittenden stood at the pinnacle of his legal practice. The romance endured 7 years, spanning multiple states. He allegedly vowed matrimony once circumstances permitted. She trusted his word completely. Late in 1870, devastating truth shattered her illusions. His wife remained very much alive, his family completely intact. Laura retreated into isolation. His correspondence abruptly ceased. Evidence suggests Crittenden planned relocating his wife and children eastward to suppress the brewing scandal. On the afternoon of November 3rd, Laura discovered the family's departure was imminent. That very day, she donned black mourning attire, concealed a compact pistol within her handbag, and made her way toward the Oakland ferry terminal. Gas lamps flickered to life along the wharf as twilight approached. The tide surged high against wooden pilings. Travelers streamed aboard, clutching parcels and boarding passes. Laura followed at a careful distance, projecting perfect composure. Nothing about her suggested impending violence. Security personnel saw merely another solitary passenger. To Crittenden's family, she remained just another veiled silhouette in the crowd. But as the vessel departed the pier and steamed toward the city, silent determination had crystallized within her. By nightfall, years of suppressed anguish would erupt into a single irreversible act that would haunt San Francisco for generations. Departing her lodgings that afternoon, Laura Fair descended Montgomery Street toward the waterfront district. Bay wind carried a penetrating chill. Pavements glistened from earlier mist. She moved deliberately, veil lowered. At the wharf, the Oakland ferry El Capitan built steam pressure for its 4:30 departure. Among waiting passengers stood Alexander Crittenden, his wife Clara, and their teenage son Parker. They'd recently returned from an extended eastern visit. Crittenden warmly greeted various associates along the pier. Witnesses noted his relaxed, almost jovial demeanor. He carried a leather briefcase and escorted his wife to the upper deck, where seating overlooked the bay's fading golden light. Laura maintained distance near the lower gangway. She purchased passage, folded the ticket once, and tucked it inside her glove. The ticket clerk later testified he detected nothing alarming, only slight trembling in her hands during payment. When the departure bell rang, crowds surged forward. The gangplank lifted, mooring chains clanked free, and the vessel pushed slowly from the dock. Coal smoke drifted across the deck. Through saloon windows, the city contracted to a distant roofline. Crittenden settled beside his wife, conversing quietly about their journey. Their son wandered aft to observe water churning against the paddle wheels. Laura remained below near the ladies' cabin. Fellow passengers recalled her standing motionless by the doorway, nervously rotating a small purse in her hands. Periodically, she glanced up the staircase toward the upper deck. One woman later testified that Laura's expression appeared frozen, neither anxious nor peaceful, but rather awaiting some signal that never arrived. Midway across the bay, she ascended the stairs. Evening dimness had settled. Thin wind swept across the water. She proceeded along the deck, paused briefly at the railing, then continued until spotting them seated ahead. Clara leaned against her husband's shoulder, speaking softly. Laura approached closer, withdrew the compact pistol from her handbag, and fired a single shot directly into Alexander's chest. Witnesses heard the sharp crack. They watched him collapse backward in his seat. Absolute silence. Then chaos, shouting, running footsteps. Parker lunged forward, seizing the woman's wrist. The pistol tumbled from her grip, clattering onto wooden planks. She made zero attempt to escape. "I am the one," she declared. "He has destroyed me." Captain Kenzel of the Harbour Police rushed up from the lower deck. He immediately took command, ordering the weapon secured and the woman detained until landfall. The ferry reversed course toward the pier, its whistle piercing through gathering mist. Passengers stood frozen in stunned silence as city lights grew nearer. Before the vessel reached shore, news of the shooting had already begun, spreading through waterfront establishments and commercial offices facing the bay. The shot's echo had barely faded when the ferry began decelerating. Funnel smoke merged with evening fog. Passengers turned silently toward the upper saloon, where a man lay crumpled against the bench. Captain Kenzel, fortunately aboard that evening, responded instantly. Alexander Crittenden lay motionless, his wife Clara kneeling beside him, palm pressed desperately against the bleeding wound. Parker stood frozen, staring at the fallen pistol. A steward fetched blankets, another brought water. The captain cleared the deck, stationing constables at both stairways. The shooter remained seated near the doorway, dressed entirely in black, veil still lowered. When the officer approached, she calmly surrendered the weapon, a small 4-barrel Sharps pepper box, and identified herself as Laura Fair. Her voice remained steady. "He has destroyed me," she stated, "and I am finished." The ferry continued toward San Francisco. At the wharf, crowds had already assembled, drawn by rumor before the vessel even docked. A carriage waited. At 8 p.m., the gangway dropped. Constables carried Crittenden ashore, followed by his wife and son. The carriage departed for Davis Street, where physicians had prepared a quiet lodging house as emergency surgery. Ferry witnesses were questioned separately. Their accounts proved remarkably consistent. One shot, close range. The assailant showed no emotion afterward. The pistol was sealed in paper wrapping and logged as evidence. In the modest Davis Street room, physicians worked by lamplight. They documented the bullet's entry point near the left breast, its probable lodging near the lung. His breathing grew shallow, pulse weakening. He briefly regained consciousness, only to whisper indistinct words. Clara maintained her vigil bedside, hands folded silently. By nightfall, word reached every legal office along Montgomery Street. Clerks repeated identical reports. "Mr. Crittenden has been shot aboard the ferry." The evening newspaper printed a brief notice before midnight. Outside, the bay lay silent. The El Capitan, scrubbed and prepared, awaited its next morning crossing. Throughout the night of November 3rd, lamps burned in the narrow Davis Street rooms. Surgeons came and departed wordlessly, their instruments arranged on folded towels beside the bed. Alexander Crittenden drifted between consciousness and oblivion, breathing shallow, the wound darkening beneath bandages. Clara remained beside him, still wearing her traveling dress from the ferry. Every few minutes she rose to moisten his lips, then sat again without speaking. Downstairs, Parker spoke with constables maintaining watch at the entrance. They recorded times and statements, the small mantel clock marking each passing hour. Messages were dispatched to friends and colleagues across the city. By midnight, several senior bar members had gathered in the street below, awaiting news. They spoke sparingly. One man gazed toward the water and remarked that morning would arrive soon. At the harbour, the El Capitan lay moored under gaslight, decks washed, her name already spoken in every tavern. Newspaper runners moved along Market Street distributing handbills. Prominent attorney shot by female companion. Printers set type for morning editions, while in the upper room near the pier, the man at the story's center lay dying. By the following afternoon, surgeons declared minimal hope remained. The bullet had lodged near the heart, beyond surgical reach. Clara sent word to their children at home. Friends arrived in quiet succession, standing briefly at the bedside before departing. No one mentioned the woman imprisoned below in the city jail. Her name passed only in whispers. On November 5th, at 6 p.m., Crittenden's breathing ceased. Surgeons recorded a brief notation and put away their instruments. Outside, Davis street lamps were being lit. Word of his death spread throughout the city before darkness fell. Courts adjourned. State offices shuttered their windows, flags lowered to half-mast. At the wharf, the ferry bell continued its regular tolling through the fog. Passengers awaiting night service stood without conversation. The tide moved beneath the pilings, and the same cold wind that had pursued the El Capitan 2 nights prior swept the bay again, carrying with it the final traces of that November evening. At St. Mary's Hospital, where the post-mortem examination occurred, Dr. Leland Stanford, Jr., Chief Surgeon of the Municipal Board, conducted the autopsy on November 6, 1870. He documented a single entry wound to the left breast, the bullet traveling downward and inward, lodging near the heart. No additional injuries or struggle marks were evident. In his professional opinion, death resulted from internal hemorrhaging caused by the gunshot wound. The weapon matched a small 4-barrel Sharps pistol discharged at close range. The report described Crittenden as medium-framed, well-nourished, with composed countenance. Garments were carefully removed for documentation. Each blood-stained article was sealed and labeled. Powder residue on the waistcoat indicated the muzzle had been within 2 feet of his chest. Soot traces on his left hand suggested he'd raised it instinctively at the moment of discharge. At the city prison, Laura underwent examination by a matron and was found calm, pulse steady. She provided coherent testimony, admitting she'd purchased the pistol days earlier from a Montgomery Street shop. She claimed she carried it for protection, never intending to use it until overcome by emotional distress. Her voice remained firm. She answered every question with precision. Constables retrieved the weapon from Ferry records. 3 cartridges remained loaded. The fired chamber showed shallow burn marks around the rim. Police armory tests confirmed the bullet extracted from Crittenden's chest matched the Sharps model caliber. The weapon and remaining ammunition were sealed and transferred to the district attorney's office. The coroner's jury convened the next morning at the Davis Street lodging house. After hearing surgical findings and passenger statements, they returned a verdict: willful murder by the hand of Laura Fair. The body was released to the family that same day and transported to the Crittenden residence on Sutter Street, where friends gathered in somber silence. The funeral proceeded on November 6th beneath grey skies. Government offices, courts, and even the Post Exchange suspended operations for an hour. Long processions of carriages moved slowly through streets toward Laurel Hill Cemetery. The coffin, draped in black cloth, bore no decoration except a single wreath of laurel and ivy. By evening, the inquiry concluded. Physicians signed their reports. Constables finalized their notes. The case formally transferred to the courts, where legal examination, rather than medical, was about to commence. At first light on November 7th, constables returned to the ferry El Capitan to complete their investigation. Decks remained damp from washing. Pier air felt cold and sharp. Near one of the upper saloon benches, they discovered a small object wedged between boards, a handkerchief embroidered with initials LF. Lightly stained and folded once, the item was sealed and conveyed to the sheriff's office as supplementary evidence. Further search of Laura Fair's Montgomery Street rooms yielded a locked trunk. Inside, several letters written in firm, feminine script, each addressed to A.C. and signed, "Yours, Laura." The tone alternated between affection and despair. One letter dated July 1870 contained the line, "You have destroyed all that was honest in me, yet I cannot cease to care for you." Another, written in October, referenced his decision to send his wife and family east, an attempt she believed was designed to erase her name from his life. The letters were sealed in an envelope and delivered to the district attorney's office. Officials debated whether their contents should be publicized. Some argued they demonstrated motive and premeditation. Others claimed they revealed a mind unbalanced by deception. The documents were read privately behind closed doors, then stored with the weapon and clothing as part of the official record. Outside, newspapers showed no such restraint. The Alta California published a column titled "Tragedy of the Bay," detailing the evidence search and the woman's demeanor in custody. Crowds gathered before bulletin boards to read each posted line. On Market Street, booksellers displayed cheap pamphlets promising the true account, though no one yet possessed complete facts. By week's end, ferry service resumed. Deck stains had been planned away, benches freshly varnished. Only those who worked the route remembered the sound that had shattered the calm 2 nights prior. They remarked the crossing felt different now, as though some permanent mark remained in the air itself. In the city courthouse record room, the sealed packet containing handkerchief, letters and pistol rested together, silently awaiting trial. The inquest into Alexander Crittenden's death opened on April 3, 1871, at the San Francisco Hall of Justice, presided over by Judge Lorenzo Sawyer. The small courtroom filled early, bar members, newspapermen, and numerous women from suffrage societies who'd taken interest in the accused. The atmosphere remained subdued. Only shuffling papers and creaking chairs broke the silence. Dr. Leland Stanford, Jr., the attending surgeon, testified first. He stated he'd examined the remains on November 6th, finding one wound to the left breast, bullet lodged near the heart. In his professional opinion, death resulted directly from that injury, produced by a pistol fired at extremely close range. No other violent signs were evident. Captain Kensel of the Harbor Police followed. He confirmed he'd been aboard the El Capitan when the incident occurred and that the accused surrendered herself without resistance upon his order. He described her demeanor as composed, voice steady, her statement, "He has destroyed me," uttered in calm tones rather than anger. The 4-barrel Sharps pistol was identified and placed on the clerk's table. Multiple passengers provided testimony. Mrs. Thompson, seated near the saloon during the incident, stated she heard a single report and turned to witness the gentleman fall forward. "The lady in black stood motionless," she testified. "She made no attempt to flee." Another witness, a deckhand, confirmed the prisoner remained seated until escorted below. The most delicate testimony came from Clara Crittenden, who appeared veiled and pale. She said little beyond duty's requirements, that her husband had discussed closing his practice and traveling east with the family, and that she'd known nothing of the woman who followed them onto the ferry until after the shooting. Her statement was received in absolute silence. In her own defense, Laura Fair was invited to speak. She rose and addressed the bench quietly, explaining her act was not calculated, but rather sudden frenzy brought on by months of betrayal and physical deterioration. Her counsel cited recent medical literature on female nervous disorders, arguing the mind in such cases could succumb to temporary insanity. After brief deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of murder in the first degree. The room remained motionless as the words were read. Judge Sawyer pronounced sentence for July 28, 1871, death by hanging at San Quentin. The prisoner bowed her head but made no sound. As crowds dispersed, a few suffragist visitors lingered near the doorway, speaking in hushed tones of sympathy and disbelief. Outside, fog had thickened over the courthouse square, muting the city's noise. The verdict of April 26, 1871, sent shockwaves throughout the city. By evening, newspapers issued special editions. The San Francisco Bulletin proclaimed "Justice for Crittenden," the court's sentence upheld. Others questioned the jury's haste, labeling the trial a spectacle of sentiment and severity. Every coffeehouse, courtroom, and hotel lobby debated their own version of the affair. The case's influence extended beyond city limits. In Sacramento, the Daily Union printed letters demanding clemency, while the Alta California praised judicial firmness. For editors, the question transcended guilt. Had the act stemmed from reason or delirium? Medical writers invoked female hysteria, citing emerging theories of mind and physiology. Ministers denounced passion's weakness from pulpits. Reformers condemned law's weakness. Among the reformers, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who visited the prisoner at San Quentin in early May. Reports in the Pioneer described them walking the narrow corridor, pausing at her cell door, discussing justice and women's rights before the law. "She is not the monster they've portrayed her," Stanton reportedly remarked. Their visit divided public opinion. Some praised the compassionate gesture, others condemned it as court defiance. Rumors multiplied. A petition for reprieve was allegedly circulating among the city's women. Another claimed the governor himself doubted the proceedings' fairness. Simultaneously, pamphlets appeared for sale outside the courthouse. The Tragic Life of Laura Fair, a lesson to faithless men, each claiming to tell the authentic story. Cheap engravings depicted her likeness, veil lifted, pistol in hand. The prosecution responded with renewed severity. Bulletin articles reminded readers the act was deliberate, that 7 years of deception didn't excuse murder. "If passion may constitute a defense," one column asked, "what safety remains for the law?" Yet even within legal circles, opinions diverged. Some believed the verdict sound, but the sentence excessively absolute. Others perceived in her calm a form of despair rather than malice. By midsummer, attention shifted toward the anticipated execution. Crowds gathered outside prison gates whenever her name appeared in print. Yet inside Montgomery Street legal offices, another movement was forming. A petition to the California Supreme Court, asserting procedural errors and the prejudicial tone of the judge's jury remarks. The city's noise faded into expectancy. July 28th approached. Gallows construction was reportedly underway. Then, a single telegram from Sacramento, received 11 days before the scheduled execution, altered the case's trajectory entirely. On July 11, 1871, the California Supreme Court issued its order. Laura Fair's execution was stayed, and the case returned for review. The telegram reached San Francisco before noon. By nightfall, gallows timbers were dismantled, and the city found itself divided once more. Some spoke of justice delayed, others of justice corrected. In subsequent months, formal criticism of the first trial accumulated. Justices noted irregularities in jury selection, admission of inflammatory evidence, and the judge's closing remarks, which appeared prejudiced. Medical testimony regarding female illness effects and mental agitation had been admitted, then dismissed without explanation. The verdict, Justice Crockett wrote, was reached in an atmosphere of moral excitement rather than legal precision. Behind procedural language lay a quieter admission. The case had exposed fault lines within the courts themselves. Newspapers seized the theme again. The Daily Examiner wrote that law's administration must not depend upon sentiment. The Alta California, less severe, called it an opportunity to temper judgment with understanding. The second trial opened in September 1872 in dramatically changed circumstances. The courtroom was smaller, crowds thinner. The prisoner, dressed in black silk, made no statement. Her counsel argued she'd acted under temporary derangement caused by emotional shock and physical distress. No contradicting evidence was presented. The jury deliberated less than an hour before returning a verdict, not guilty, by reason of temporary insanity. The reaction was subdued, no cheering, no visible triumph. The woman who'd once been the center of citywide debate stood motionless, hands clasped before her. The court dismissed all charges. She was released that same evening. In the official record, the decision was summarized in 2 lines. Judgment reversed. Accused discharged. No further proceedings ordered. Within the following week, editorials moved on to other matters. The railway, the drought, the coming election. The file of The People versus Laura Fair remained open briefly, then was marked complete and stored in state archives. A single marginal note recorded the change. Sentence annulled. Mental derangement established. Years later, her name still surfaced in quiet conversations along the bay. Law office clerks recalled the trial as a moment when emotion and statute stood side by side, uncertain which would prevail. Among older attorneys, some spoke of it as a warning, others as a reprieve. Few agreed on what justice had actually meant. Laura Fair lived on in the city that had once condemned her to death. She operated a small shop on Market Street, selling books and stationery, her manner precise, her hair turned white. Occasionally she wrote under another name for local newspapers, short essays on law, reputation, and the public consciousness. In one, she quoted scripture, "The heart knoweth its own bitterness." She reportedly read the papers each morning without comment, turning past the column that sometimes mentioned her case. When her death came, in October 1919, there was no notice in major publications. She was buried under her married name in an unmarked grave at Woodlawn Memorial Park, Colma. A clerk entered the record and filed it among hundreds of others from that year. No one attended from the courts or the old suffrage movement. Only a few neighbors stood by in silence. In San Francisco, the ferries continued their crossings, water dark beneath evening lamps. At times, when fog settles over the bay, sailors say the sound of a single shot can still be heard far off, fading into the wind, as if the night itself were remembering its own.